Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Paday. I'm the AVP for Alumni Relations here at the University of Houston, your Alumni Association, activating our UH2U webinar for you this evening on a beautiful night in Houston. Our title today is 100 Days In. The Biden administration has obviously been in for 100 days, and so we've activated again our colleagues in the political science arena and the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences for our webinar here this evening. I know we got an incredible response when we did this back before the election or immediately after the election. We've done it a few times, so I've lost track. But and thank you all for being here. We're going to have an open forum as well after our two presenters bring you some information on behalf of the 100 days of the Biden administration. That went pretty quickly, that 100 days. It has been anything but uneventful. So there's plenty of content here this evening. I want to remind everybody to keep your viewfinder, as you call it on Zoom, in the speaker view. That'll allow you to have the main speaker on your screen. You'll also be able to utilize the chat function at the bottom of your screen to be able to put questions in the chat throughout. The chat questions make our conversation go. So please make sure you put your questions in the chat. We do have a few questions to get us started, and there'll be an open Q&A at the end of our program today. So I'm honored to introduce to you our two co-hosts today. Dr. Geronimo Cortina is an award-winning associate professor in the Department of Political Science, specializing in survey research, immigration, development, and quantitative methods. He is also the associate director of the Center for Mexican American Studies at the University of Houston, and he is becoming a regular here on UH2U, so we appreciate Dr. Cortina joining us. And also joining us today, Dr. Jason Casillas, an associate professor in the Department of Political Science. Dr. Casillas specializes in American politics with specific research and teaching interests in Latino politics, legislative politics, state and local politics as well. I think there's plenty in all those categories, Jason and Geronimo. So I appreciate you gentlemen being here today. And it's certainly, as I'll kick you off and Kendra will finish up, gosh, is there anything to talk about in the first 100 days? I mean, in the last 48 hours, there seems to be a crisis that's worth discussing at some point as well, and how the Biden administration will handle that. So to kick it off, Dr. Cortina, why don't I let you kick it off today with some opening comments. We'll take opening comments from all of you, and then we'll get cranking and let you guys run with it, okay? Let me thank you for being here and giving your time. I know class is graduating right now because of the rain last night, so we appreciate you being here this evening and taking your time out. And I'll kick it to you.
All right, thank you, Mike, and thank you so much to the Alumni Association, to Kendra, to Deidre from class to organize these forums. It's extremely important for us to be in touch with all our alumni. So I'm very happy to be joined today by my dear friend and colleague, Jason Casillas. And so before we start, let me just, ask Jason, what do you think? I mean, let me just start the ball rolling and, start with the most obvious thing, right? And the most obvious thing from the Biden administration has been the response of the administration towards COVID-19. We have record vaccination in less than 100 days. His administration surpassed the number of people vaccinated. We had a couple of stimulus packages going on, people getting money, getting the economy starting up again. And, what else?
Well, thank you, Dr. Cortina. It's great to be here, and I just echo, the thanks to all the Alumni Association folks who made this possible. So yeah, this first 100 days, and I just want to back up and kind of give this context, because most of you probably may not be familiar with the history of this, but Franklin Roosevelt, when he was president, sort of measured his first 100 days, and since Roosevelt's presidency, every president has tried to get a lot done within their first 100 days, and many have not sort of reached the kind of things that FDR did during those 100 days, which was pass probably more bills than any other president, and certainly since then, no one's met his standard. Nevertheless, presidents are still trying to judge their standards by these first 100 days. And, with the Biden administration, certainly a lot has happened. Dr. Cortina mentioned that probably the most important thing, which was the stimulus package. We did have a kind of the CARES Act, which didn't go far enough. But then in March, the about $2 trillion stimulus package, which was very important in terms of getting sort of those checks that many folks got, these stimulus checks. But not only that, state and local government money as well. Many state and local governments, will not sort of be in the red because of this legislation. If you look at the city of Houston, our budget because of this legislation will not run a deficit. And of course, even in the states, right, the state of Texas, the budget looks much better today because of things like this than it did, 6-7 months ago. So obviously, that's probably the most important thing. Just to think about it in terms of volume of legislation, obviously Mr. Biden has been successful, I think, in his first 100 days in sort of getting the most important piece of legislation out. Right now, I think the challenge is the infrastructure bill that he's working on, right? And there's been some sort of reluctance in terms of the price tag, right? And so that'll be something he's going to have to work with Democrats in the Congress, but also to a lesser extent Republicans who are not sort of inclined to support him. Dr. Cortina, anything you want to react to that, or should I keep going?
No, well, I mean, you're going to give a whole lecture on what's going on. No, it's perfect. And this gives us, very, very important points, right? So the first point is, as you said, the Biden administration had some successes in terms of legislation, primarily, the rescue package, right? And that was due to a maneuver that was, basically done in the Senate, and primarily given the fact that they didn't have to have this issue of the filibuster, confront the filibuster. As probably everybody remembers, the Senate is split in half, 50-50, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, and Vice President Harris being the decisive vote in this case. So I guess the question that I have is, is this it? I mean, have we seen everything that we're supposed to see during the Biden administration? And I ask this question because, the big and very deep divisions that exist, not only, between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate and the House, but also to a certain extent within the Democratic Party and also the Republican Party, as we saw yesterday with Representative Cheney ousted out of that third post in the House within the Republican conference. So what's your take? I mean, we're expecting to see this infrastructure bill coming up pretty soon. Republicans in the Senate say, no way, it's too expensive. Republicans in the House, well, they maybe say that it's too expensive, but there are a minority there, or they can, Democrats can muster the vote. So what's going to happen? I mean, is it? Is it going to be, the Biden administration trying to negotiate these in the next 3 years and change?
Yeah, so those are all good points. And I think, if we look at the sort of how closely divided Congress is, the Senate couldn't be any closer, right? It's 50-50. And in the House, you have, I think it's a margin of 7 or 8 seats. So, Democrats don't have a lot of wiggle room there in terms of getting these legislations passed. I think, at the end of the day, we'll see an infrastructure package. It's not going to be as big as Biden wants because, of course, he's going to have to bring Manchin, Senator Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat from West Virginia, who's probably the pivotal voter in the Senate, the moderate Democrat who is probably king of the Senate right now because he's the one who, basically is wined and dined by Biden. In fact, actually, Biden's invited him to the White House, and he's probably getting quite a lot of attention from Biden. I'm sure he likes that. And so I think the infrastructure bill, it won't be as big as Biden wants, but I think something will happen because I think there is a bipartisan sense. And again, there doesn't have to be a bipartisan sense, but I think there is sort of a sense, at least, that Joe Manchin believes that there should be an infrastructure bill. And so he's a little reticent on the cost, but I think, Biden will be able to get, most of the Democrats in the House and of course, Manchin along to get.
So, but if Biden gets the 50 Democrats, right, and he muscles every single Democrat in the Senate to say, you're going to vote for these or else. What happens to the remaining 10 votes? Can he get the 10 remaining votes from the Republican side?
Yeah, I mean, so that's why he's going to have to work with Susan Collins and some of the more moderate Republicans there, Mitt Romney, because I think they're individuals who do want an infrastructure bill. They just don't want the size, right, that the Biden administration is currently proposing. And of course, there are these sort of mechanisms that the Senate can use to avoid the cloture vote. Remember, the cloture vote, of course, you need 60 votes in order to stop debate, right? And so that's the debate about the filibuster. However, as we saw with the stimulus bill, with reconciliation bills, these are budget bills, you only need a simple majority, right? And so this can only happen, though, several times within a legislative session. And it's already happened once, right? And the bills have to be sort of budget related. And so whether the infrastructure bill can come on as what's called an omnibus reconciliation bill, that will have to be seen down the line, and maybe Biden will go there if he can't get a few Republicans to support cloture, right? So, yeah, there is sort of a fine line, I think, that the administration has to follow. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, there is a sense in which there needs to be some infrastructure spending, and of course, if we back up a little bit and think about other events that could lead to problems, right? And so I think the big issue that we're seeing now is inflation, right? So we just saw the report about how inflation is going up, and the administration says it's a short-term thing because all of a sudden there's a lot more demand and supply chains have been affected by COVID-19. And so if inflation is a short-term thing, then it will be okay. But if it sort of becomes a problem, right, then there's going to be even more reticence on the part of Republicans and perhaps some Democrats to spend more money, right?
Right, but I mean, this matter of inflation, I mean, we're not, in the 1980s or 1970s anymore, right? So I don't think that, overall policymakers are extremely afraid. We have seen the Fed, being, it's normal to have inflation. Inflation is to a certain extent good, because that means that the economy is being reactivated, as we have seen. And to give it to the Biden administration, they have done a lot of stuff to reactivate the economy. And, the main thing and the main argument is the whole logistical vaccine operation that was put forward by the administration. So I think that was a remarkable effort and trying to do that. But let's change, gears a little bit from the infrastructure package that is extremely important. Also, within the Biden administration, I mean, these first 100 days that we saw passing, we had, a bunch of I guess, good intentions that have not been materialized, right? We have seen, for example, efforts in terms of police reform, so on and so forth, that, some people are saying, well, we're not seeing what we're supposed to be seeing. So what's going on there? What do you think is going to be, the legacy, or not the legacy, but how can we build or make an informed prediction of what's going to happen, starting after day 101?
Which is already passed, right?
Well, yes. Well, I'm sorry, day 159.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. If you look at the first 100 days, of course, presidents try to pack in as much as possible, right? Because of the traditional honeymoon period. Just like in a marriage, at the beginning of a marriage, there's a honeymoon and everything is blissful, and then it's all downhill from there, right?
Well, I don't think that there was a honeymoon here at all.
That's the thing, and that's the traditional sort of honeymoon period. You don't see that anymore, right? Because of polarization and partisanship, right? That there's little sort of incentive for members of the opposing party to give any slack, right, to the president. And so, in recent years, we haven't seen this honeymoon period. Nevertheless, Biden has to know that historically, right, in the midterm elections after a presidential first 2 years, the opposing party gained seats, right? And we know that Republicans are within a very close margin here to recapture control. And then if that happens in 2022, then what, right, then what is Biden going to be able to accomplish? It's going to be even more difficult, right? And so that's why he has to take advantage of this policy window, this window of opportunity, I think, to get as much done as he can, in this first 2 years. So this first, whatever days that is in his first part of his presidency, right? And I think he's trying to do that, but at the same time, we know that, as with every other president, we have really high hopes. They campaign on a lot of issues and they can't possibly get everything accomplished.
Right. But now, thinking about, already 2022 and the next election, right? I cannot believe we haven't even, digested 2020, and we're already in election mode, as we can see. So within the Democratic Party and also within the Republican Party, we see very important divisions, right? We see that especially within the Democratic Party, there is no party line. It doesn't seem to be, at least from the outside, very strong party discipline. I mean, we saw that, or we can see that with the Republican Party. The Republican Party, it's the law of the hammer. If you're not aligned with whatever it is that we're talking about, then you're going to get, at least shoot off of very important positions. So do you think that, if Democrats preparing for 2022, advancing the Biden agenda, do you think that Democrats need to sit down and say, well, we have power, because they have power in the House, they have kind of power in the Senate, but they can come up with something very, very unorthodox to do and get rid of the filibuster. And obviously they have the White House. Do you think that, to a certain extent, the Democratic Party is afraid of exerting the power that they already have or were given by the people? As the Republican Party made those arguments. Mitch McConnell has made those arguments many, many times. We were voting in, and we're going to do what we are supposed to do. Why the Democrats don't adopt the same strategy that Mitch McConnell had put it in a silver plate for them to use?
Yeah, so that's a good point, and I think certainly many members of the Democratic Party are trying to make that point. And indeed, they sort of were able to at least get the stimulus package done, right? And so they did that with no Republican votes, right? So that's one example of sort of taking their power and using it in order to pass legislation, right? Of course, it's easier to do with something like the stimulus because you just needed a majority. The problem with the filibuster is that, you got to remember, you only have 50 votes, right? And Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema of Arizona, they flat out say they're not going to support ending the filibuster. And obviously they're not going to do that, because then that means less power for them, right? They don't want to relinquish any of their power. And so, of course, they come from states, most notably Senator Manchin from a state that Trump won by a margin greater than any other state. So he obviously has his own electoral constituency in mind and his own electoral fortunes, right? And of course, with the issue with the filibuster, there's always a concern, right, that that if you do get rid of the filibuster and then you're in the minority in the future, then you might regret it, right? So there is a sense in which what goes around comes around. And so I think that could be part of that reticence, especially with those other sort of senators who are deeply entwined with the traditions of the Senate, even though they may not be moderates, kind of like Manchin, but they're just more sort of traditional senators who are just caught up in the institution, right? And they like the institution. And so I think that's sort of the issue there. The Senate needs a majority of votes to change the rules, right? And they don't have the votes. That's the bottom line, right? That's why they haven't changed.
Well, but if they want to do anything, right? If they want to do anything, they have to find a way of doing it, right? We have some competitive races in 2022, both in the House and the Senate, where the Democrats can increase their advantage. I don't know. Republicans maybe in some cases can do that. Again, I don't know, but it's going to depend on how much Democrats can deliver from today till November of next year. And that will solidify, their advantage in terms of the campaign. So also, the Biden administration has, a couple of things that have done, and that's, foreign relations and relationships with other countries, right? That former President Trump had a very particular way of dealing with foreign countries. So we're seeing today potentially a very, very complicated conflict between Israel and Palestine. And, what do you think is going to be the Biden administration's reaction to that?
Yeah, so this is a really challenging situation, right? I mean, just right now, before we came on, Israel has sent ground troops into Gaza, which is sort of further escalation of the conflict. The president has spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's in his own troubles because I think there have been 6 or 7 elections in Israel in the past, 3 months or something. And so he's having trouble himself creating a government. And of course, Biden has said that Israel has a right to defend itself. So in a sense, he's kind of taken the side of Israel, which is not unusual given that American policy, for the most part, has sided with the state of Israel. On the other hand, many members of his party, of the Democratic Party, side more with the Palestinians. And of course, we've been upset, I think, with Biden in terms of saying that he hasn't said enough or hasn't spoken out against some of the bombings and things of the Israeli government. And so I think it's a challenging situation for him. I mean, I think he's just hoping that things will just die down on their own, but that's just a hope, and it's one that I think may sort of be a little bit optimistic, right? Given how things are just starting to escalate even more. But this tinderbox, there's certainly has been an issue for many, many years, and it just so happens to have been inflamed right now, which is really bad timing, I think, given, for the president, especially given all the other concerns that are happening in the world, right? Because you still have to get a handle on COVID in countries like Brazil and countries like even in Europe. And so that's also going on, not to mention China's aggression in the East. And sort of China's provocative moves with respect to the South China Sea and Taiwan. So international policy, this is going to be a major concern, I think, of the administration, major challenge.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a complete mess, right? Because even though the U.S. has called for, ceasefire and cease military operations, I don't think anyone is listening anymore, right? And it used to be the case that when the U.S. said, ceasefire, everyone's ceasefire immediately. But now it's not the case, and that's extremely worrisome because one of the I guess, or perhaps the only key issue that unites all the countries in the region is the Palestine cause. And what did okay, I don't know what I did. that could do significant problems in terms of creating or escalating a conflict that can be, transported to different countries and create even a more volatile situation. And obviously is Israel politics and American politics are very well entrenched in terms of our historic relationship with Israel. But I think it's getting more and more complicated. As you said, Netanyahu doesn't have formed a government yet, and Israel has a parliament rather than a presidential system, and that means that within the parliament they have to create a coalition of different parties. And in Israel, you have quite a few number of parties that have very, very different political views and ideologies. So it's trying to fit square piece in a circle jigsaw puzzle. So it's quite complicated, even though Netanyahu is quite a politician and very, very astute, it's going to be extremely complicated to see what happens in terms of the situation with Israel and Palestine. But what is obviously, extremely bad is the loss of human life, and that should be something that, is not good in any shape or form.
And then not to add more sort of negativity. I mean, you still have the issue of Iran and the nuclear program that hasn't really gone away. That sort of how will we deal with Iran? What will Iran do? Sort of the whole issue of Iran and sort of the relationship with Hezbollah and Hamas, right? That's all going to be intertwined here. And so the Middle East has never been a calm, stable place, right? And so that's just something that every president has to be prepared for, that it's like a tinderbox, right? It's going to, explode at some point, and unfortunately, we're seeing some of that now.
But now that we're speaking in Middle East, oil, that kind of stuff, how does the Green Deal or the new climate change plan from the Biden administration might or might not hurt Texas? And we saw immediately when that was presented, there was a significant and a lot of opposition, particularly from our governor, saying that all jobs were going to be defended, like if it was the Alamo or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you have the issue of refineries, and in fact, if you drive along the Beltway there, you see all the refineries, and there's American jobs or something, American independence. I think that's on one of the refineries there. And I think that was a big issue during the election. Of course, the Republicans, said if Biden was elected, then, jobs would, in the oil and gas industry would evaporate. I think certainly, I mean, the Green New Deal as envisioned by, AOC and others, that stands little chance, right, obviously, of being enacted. But the president still has rejoined the Paris Climate Accords and at least has promised to try to sort of speed the way towards a more green initiatives. And I think once you see sort of that it's going to be a gradual transmission, a gradual evolution rather, rather than an immediate sort of doing away with fossil fuels, right? Because we know that's not practical, especially when you're dealing with situations like these, right, where you have high inflation, or the economy is not doing too well, and they're moving toward all electric cars, for example, very, very soon is just not feasible, right? And so I think the president realizes that, but nevertheless is sort of trying to push in that direction, right? And largely, I think that's the environmentalists within his own party are pushing him very strongly, no question. And I think he has to be responsive to them, in order to maintain that political support.
Well, and that's a key question, right? That's one of the key differences that exists within the Democratic Party, is that you have a very progressive new or wing within the Democratic Party, mostly, younger politicians, and then you have these more moderate, more conservative part of the Democratic Party that, still, progressive, but progressive in a sense that does not match the current demographics of people that are voting for the Democratic Party. And that puts the coalition that elected President Biden in a very, very questionable position, and that is obviously going to have important implications. So we have a question from Michael Fausto, and he asks, is the Biden administration achieving optimal efficacy in regards to keeping authoritarian governments in check? Has the administration's foreign policy agenda been too assertive or not assertive enough? Since you travel more than I do, Jason, why don't you take a first stab?
I mean, I think it's a little early to think about assertiveness. I mean, I think one of the things that every sort of country or every country is going to do at the beginning of any administration, it sort of tests that administration, right? And we may be seeing some of that happening, right? In terms of countries like China, sort of like Russia, sort of trying to go to the, if you see Russia and Putin sort of, putting his troops there on the border with Ukraine, just sort of kind of pushing pushing, and seeing how the United States will react. And so I think they're trying to get a feel of how Biden reacts and how, what he will do, right? And I think that's that's something that's expected at the beginning of every presidency. On a lot of issues, though, if you look at Secretary Blinken, the Secretary of State, there's been sort of a lot of interesting things that you didn't really expect, from a Democratic administration in some respects. For example, I think the issue of Taiwan and China, certainly the administration, has been sort of very supportive of Taiwan. Of course, there has to be sort of a balancing act there because China considers Taiwan part of their territory, and the Taiwanese, of course, have their own elections, and yet, for example, China has been flying a lot of their aircraft into sort of Taiwanese airspace. And again, part of that is just testing to see how the Americans will react to that. And so I think in many ways, the Biden administration, I think, is sort of, I don't think they've been too assertive. I wouldn't say that. But at the same time, I think they've reacted in ways that have been sort of, I think, appropriate. And when you look at something like Ukraine, the president did, make sure that there were some sanctions, right, on Russia. And so on China as well, the president has sort of not tried to alienate China, but at the same time, be very clear about some of the things China is doing. For example,
No, I think something happened with your audio, or?
In the back?
Oh yeah, there you go.
I don't know if you caught the last part. I was talking.
Yeah, I don't know. No, we cannot hear you. It's like very, very,
Okay. So I was just talking about what was happening in China, right? And sort of the president calling out China for, okay.
I don't know what do you do to your microphone? I don't know, because suddenly we stopped hearing you. I don't know. It's like if you were put in a box. Probably you were saying something that you shouldn't be saying, and then someone put you in a box. So we can.
Being censored by someone. I don't know.
There you go. Okay. I don't know what you do. All right. So the other point, I guess, the other point would be, in terms of the Biden administration. I guess assertiveness in foreign policy. There's a couple of things or points that I want to make. Well, first is we haven't seen. I'm taking more a stand that they have not been assertive enough. I mean, since the beginning of the administration, we have the coup in Myanmar, and the administration response has been kind of lukewarm. Like I don't know, but there hasn't been significant or a significant stance or very strong stance in times. Granted that we also have to be cautious, and since perhaps the Clinton administration, the U.S. role in foreign policy has been, perhaps less assertive, right? And obviously with former President Trump, he was like, I mean, you guys are on your own, and to a certain extent, just dealing with very particular aspects of the situation. Then, on the other hand, you have domestic public opinion, and domestic public opinion is, very, very high percentages of no way, no involvement of the U.S. in any other foreign country. We had Afghanistan 20-year war. That people are just tired, and that has very important implications. And the Biden administration is also going to weigh in, right? Domestic politics and international politics, and in some cases, domestic politics is the winner.
Yeah, I think. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yeah, it's better.
All right. Okay, no, I think, yeah, those points are right. I didn't mention Afghanistan. There's also, of course, relations with Latin America. And so how will sort of, how will you see this administration dealing with Latin America, in particular, sort of the relationship with President Lopez Obrador in Mexico?
Well, I mean, Lopez Obrador, and then you have Maduro, and then, you have a couple of other that are, extremely, I guess, complicated relationships, right? We have now obviously the issue of immigration, right, within the Biden administration, and that has changed radically from the implementation of Title 42 from the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration is dealing with perhaps an unintended or perhaps unintended consequence, right, of applying the executive power of President Trump during his administration. Immigration is going to have very important ramifications, because immigration not only is a hot topic domestically speaking, but also creates a whole set of problems for Latin American countries, for Mexico, and most importantly for all these Northern Triangle countries.
Right, and so I think when we talk about the first 100 days, obviously this crisis, right, on the border has been occupying a lot of the media's attention, right, in terms of the unaccompanied minors, but also just in general, this kind of spike in immigration. And I think there's been a lot of criticism of the administration, in particular, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and sort of what do you see in terms of immigration policy here? Because we look back to the Obama administration. Of course, there's a lot of criticism of President Obama for deporting, a lot of people. And so on the one hand, you had this balancing act with President Obama and the administration, didn't want to appear soft on illegal immigration, but at the same time, didn't want to alienate a lot of their folks in their base, right? And so do you think the Biden administration is handling this immigration crisis well?
I don't know. It's a very tough question, right? Because how can you handle immigration policy from the get-go, right, if immigration policy is broken? Our immigration policy system does not work. It's a early 20th century policy, right, that was designed for the 1900s and simply does not work with the type of economy that we have on the one hand, globalization, the integration of global supply chains, and also, right, what has happened in other countries, particularly, you had in Central America 2 hurricanes back to back, COVID-19, and violence perpetrated by gangs and drug trafficking. So when you put all those things together, you have the perfect storm, and that perfect storm is manifested in family members in these countries simply making the calculation and the risk-benefit calculation of preferring to send their children on a thousands and thousands of mile trip that is extremely dangerous, most of the times unaccompanied, to arrive to the US and try to seek something better. So just imagine imagine the situation that these people are going through in those countries. And then here you have also another situation, which is political polarization, and people simply fed up with this whole year of pandemic and trying to use and using some of the politicians using immigration as a political boogeyman. So to answer your question, I don't know.
Right, and I think that was one of the questions that someone asked, and immigration reform, right, and the prospects for reform. And certainly I'm pessimistic about the prospects of immigration reform. I mean, it's been years since we've had an immigration reform bill. And the last major one, I guess, was 1986. In 1990, you had one, but as you said, the immigration system is broken, and there's little political will, right, to try to solve the problem.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that there's going to be any solution whatsoever. And the problem is that as a policy, is completely contaminated by the politics surrounded immigration, right? Not necessarily the issues about the policy that need to be discussed. I mean, no one can deny that there is a labor shortage, and especially in certain industries, right? Construction, the whole agricultural sector, there is a shortage, right? And people argue, well, if you pay more wages, then this is what's going to happen, and then you don't need immigration. And the reality of that is that it has been tried, and it doesn't work, because younger generations, they don't want to be farmers. They don't want to work in the agricultural sector. They don't want to be picking lettuces or this or that, or they don't want to spend, building or roofing on 100-degree day for those prevailing wages. So I think that we need to sit down at the table and just discuss the policy implications, and without any politics involved. And I know that I'm being 100% naive in terms of that recommendation, but that would be what I would recommend doing it.
And just to remind everyone, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. If there's any issue that we didn't talk about that you'd like us to talk about, please do so. I see one from Nancy Clark. How will state laws on voter suppression and gerrymandering affect the midterm elections? Wow, that's a good question, right? Big question. So that's another thing we didn't talk a little bit about, of course, the 2020 census, right? And what's going to happen this year in all the states, which is redistricting. And I think one of the things that we're seeing in a lot of states, Georgia being the most prominent one, of course, here in Texas, are these new laws trying to sort of Republicans say for voter security, and of course Democrats are saying that it's for voter suppression. I think in the backdrop of all this, it's important to keep in mind that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was an important piece of legislation that it's two sections. One section, Section 2, was prohibited sort of the denial or abridgment of voting rights on account of race or ethnicity. And the other Section 5, which was preclearance, and preclearance just meant that any changes in voting laws had to be approved by the Department of Justice or the DC District Court. And in the Shelby County versus Holder case, in the last 5 or 6 years ago, I suppose, the Supreme Court ruled Section 5 unconstitutional. And so what that means for your question is that for the first time since the VRA, the Voting Rights Act, most southern states, including Texas, will not be subject to preclearance. And what that means basically is that the Texas legislature will, draw districts and, won't have to get them approved by the Department of Justice. So I think what we'll see, of course, is in those states that are Republican control, like Texas, you're going to see, gerrymandering. Well, it's everybody gerrymanders, right? So Democrats will gerrymander if they're in control. Republicans will gerrymander if they are in control. But in states like Texas, Republicans can, especially because we're gaining a couple of congressional seats, these 2 new seats will have to be created out of somewhere. And even though most of that population growth arguably didn't come from more sort of Republican inclined voters, it doesn't matter, right? The legislature draws the districts. And there still can be court challenges, but these court challenges will be Section 2 rather than Section 5 challenge. Anyway, to put the picture and to close it here, yes, gerrymandering will make a huge difference in those House races. And when we're talking about 6 or 7 seats of a margin, it could make the difference between Republican and Democratic control in the November 2022 elections.
And also because, contrary to other states, redistricting in Texas is basically a political process. In other states, you have citizen-created redistricting commissions There are, non-partisan individuals creating those districts. Today, creating districts is not as, it was 10 or 20 years ago. Today, there is enough technology, enough software to create equal districts, however one wants it. And, if you are well versed in those software, you can do the process in maybe 2 days of work, and that's it, right? But here is an inherently political process in which the state legislature creates maps. If the state legislature does not agree on those maps, then we have the Texas Redistricting Commission, that is the governor, the land commissioner, and I think it's also the controller and the state the state attorney. Sorry, the state attorney. And if that doesn't happen, right? If that doesn't happen, then you have the courts, and that's what we have been operating since 2010. It has been the maps that have been drawn by the courts. And the other aspect that is important is to know that where that population growth has come, and that population growth has come primarily from urban counties, namely Dallas County, Tarrant County, Bear County, Travis County, and obviously Harris County and Fort Bend County. So that population growth has been due to the Latino population growth in the state. So that has also implications for how these districts are going to be created or not created, and if they're going to take advantage. So we have another question, and it says, have the stimulus packages created a worker shortage? Should the border wall be part of the immigration solution? So I guess here, you have the argument that we hear most of the times, if the stimulus packages has created worker shortages because people decide not to work because they're getting a check from the federal government. So I think there is mixed evidence for that, because once again the question is at which prevailing wage. So if I receive, let's suppose, if I'm working in a fast food restaurant and I'm getting a wage of, let's say, I don't know, I'm making a month $100, right? And then I receive a check from the federal government that is going to give me $200, or let's say $150. Then I might decide to quit my job for those $100, at least for 1 month or whatever it is, and use that stimulus money and not do anything. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that people, quit their jobs and then go to get more education or retooling or learning something better that would allow them to land a better job. That's option 2. And both of these options are in the short term, right? Because people are not going to get their stimulus package money forever. It's a one deal thing, and once that money is gone, it's gone. And they're not going to be able to get, another one, because I doubt that there's going to be another one. And then, should the border wall be part of the immigration solution? Look, when you go at the border, if you think about in terms of engineering, it's impossible. I mean, there's no way that you can do that without the government taking land away from private property owners. And then the debate goes, if those people that own that land should have their lands repurposed for the purpose of building a border wall. So that's property rights, and something that we value very, very, very dearly here in Texas. The second thing is that if the border walls works, and we have had evidence that, well, it doesn't. What it works is better technology, better conditions in countries of origin to manage migration. And when you look, for example, at the numbers of Mexican migration to the U.S., those numbers are decreasing, and as a matter of fact, right now are in negative numbers. So once again, when conditions in countries of origin, as conditions in Mexico, has somewhat improved, people stop migrating. So the question is, do we want to spend that money on something that is very dubious that it's going to work? Or we want to spend the money on something else? What's going to be the return on investment if we spend the money on something else rather than the wall? Jason?
Well, I have much to add. So I'll just sort of try to answer these questions too. And in terms of the stimulus package, I think probably one of the things referring to is the federal unemployment supplement, which I think it's about $300 a week. And there's some sort of business owners are saying that they can't find workers because, especially for a lot of those low income, low wage jobs, that it's sort of better where you make more money or the same, not working. Keep in mind, this $300 weekly benefit will expire come Labor Day. And so that's going to, stop being an issue, come Labor Day. Will it matter if that money is quickly taken away between now and Labor Day? Who knows? I think some states are saying basically that they're going to do more sort of traditional work requirements, or require that people are looking for a job, in order to get such benefits. And I think a couple of states have done that. But obviously, I think we want to be careful and make sure any policies don't have perverse incentives. And so I think some policymakers are looking at this to make sure that, if indeed this is happening, that it shouldn't. But the stimulus, then, it's like I said, it's very short term, and so this weekly benefit will go away fairly soon. I think I would just echo what Dr. Cortina said about the border wall. I think a lot of the debate is political and sort of it's more of a symbolic issue. And I think really, in order to sort of solve the problem, I think there needs to be, and again, this may be naive, but to sit down and think and work through solutions, or at least real solutions, instead of kind of sound bites. And, I think when we talk about real solutions, remember, most people who are here illegally are, they don't come across the border. Many just overstay visas. Of course, with COVID, you've had sort of that happening to a lesser extent. But I think when it comes to the border wall, I think, the issue is more technology, usage of drones and other kind of high-tech surveillance and things like that, I think will be the kinds of investments that I think that should happen, because of course everyone agrees that there should be a secure border. There's no question about it. But how do you get to that point in a way that's smart and it's not a one-size-fits-all, that respects property rights and respects, for example, there's a case in Brownsville about a church, a historic church that would have been sort of razed in order to build a wall there, and that kind of thing. There needs to be sort of, I think, understanding of those kinds of issues as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think, unfortunately, believe it or not, the hour has passed, Jason. So we just want to thank everyone that joined us today, and let me pivot back to Kendra.
Thank you very much. That hour seemed to fly by, and I think that's really a testament to you guys and how well you covered those topics. I know there's so much more we probably could have gotten into, so maybe we can continue to do some of these. Thank you to everyone that joined us tonight. We're glad you could be here. If you would like to revisit this recording, or if there's somebody that would have liked to join, it will be up on our website at houstonalumni.com/webinar. That's where you can also find any upcoming events as they become available. I also want to give a plug to our newest alumni platform, Coots Connect. It's just an engagement platform that you can join, network, find jobs, post jobs, find events, and also find some friends in the directory online there. It's cootsconnect.com. You can also join groups there for your events. So thank you again, Dr. Cortina and Dr. Casillas. Thank you to the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences and the Political Science Department, and Deidre Fontaine, who helped us put this together. So I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.